I think what's most important for anyone on the planet, frankly, is to feel like they have been heard by somebody who's important to them, mom or dad. I think that's more important than, than being on a ball team or in a dance class or what. None of these things are bad. And I think I was like this in the first set. There were so many activities that the schedule became the dominant factor and rather than the child. Because I think what's most important for the child to grow up and learn is that they are not the center of the universe. And that's, you're one of 8 kids. Yeah, you know that. You're going to grow up knowing that. But they are not the most important thing. Taking care of other people and your faith is critically important as well. And so, and all of those things while you're listening to them in a car and talking with them, all of those things can be worked into the conversation.
Stuart, Heath in the house. How are you, buddy?
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here, Kenny. Looking forward to our conversation.
Stuart, thanks so much for just being with me. We're going to be talking about your family, your fatherhood, your business today. A lot of our viewers, some are fathers, some are females. And it's just been a topic that I've loved talking with other business owners, real estate professionals about, because I feel like it's something that we don't talk about enough. And it's a great way to network and get to know each other better. Stuart, help our audience out and tell us a little bit about you and your business.
I'm Stuart Heath. I am a certified public accountant. I've been practicing accounting for 38 years. I still do a little bit of that, even though I've been full-time real estate investing for the last several years. I went to Auburn University and went straight into public accounting and kind of did the accounting and fractional CFO thing for a number of years. Started investing personally in investment real estate in the year 2000, built up a pretty substantial portfolio of assets. Didn't make it through the great financial crisis with all of those, but then sort of reset and doing it again, syndicating, doing things right this time and with better quality assets as well. So that's kind of who I am, what I do at a very high level. I do love what I do. Absolutely love real estate. I like the dirt. I like the tenants. I like walking properties. I like picking up trash at properties. I like even fixing a toilet if need be. So yeah, I enjoy it all.
Stuart, you're the first person that I've had on to say that. So, what's really funny is my dad, I would say, is very similar in the way he enjoys what he does. I grew up in a house where my dad owned a few properties, but he was also the property manager. And what I saw as a child repelled me from real estate because dad was always leaving, fixing things and meeting with people and unlocking doors that people locked themselves out from and all those things. And what I've learned is that's my dad. My dad enjoys helping these people in this way. And, as the son of the dad, you don't always see the full picture, of course. So sounds like there's some similarities there.
Yeah. Does it become a nuisance sometime? Of course.
Yes.
But over time, I have developed the people that I can call. I believe the best way that I can deliver on the business plan that I sold to my investors is to be the manager ourselves. But we're always trying to find the best and most efficient way to do all that. I'm not doing a whole lot of fixing toilets anymore and stuff like that. Although I did it last week just because I was there. I knew what the problem was. And I saved $250 from calling a plumber.
Right.
That's just also being a good steward of the property and of the investors. But I do walk the properties every week and I talk to tenants. And frankly, that's where I get some of my best ideation of what to do next and how to improve a property, maybe add a revenue stream to a property, is by being there and experiencing the property with the tenants.
Does everybody know that you're the owner or are you just the property manager to them?
I usually introduce myself as the manager, but somehow they know.
Undercover boss. We'll have to pitch that one to the news stations. Stuart, let's switch over to, growing up in your household. The show is called The Invested Fathers. One thing I've learned asking, the previous guests on the show, I've learned a lot about them by asking them, what was it like growing up in their household? And we know that the younger years are formative years. So you talked about working hard for the last, I think it's 38 years, wearing different hats. Tell me, as young Stuart was growing up, what was it like in your house, and specifically, your parents?
I grew up in a great household. Yeah, you don't really realize that till much later, and you see some other things that happen to other people. My parents were only ever married to each other. They were married for 54 years. My father passed several years ago. I'm going to visit my mom right after this recording is done. I am the youngest of three, but I had a classic, I would call it Norman Rockwell childhood growing up in Birmingham and Nashville, Tennessee. I had normal sibling rivalries and stuff like that, but I had no real problems of any kind growing up. I was able to be a child until I was ready to grow up, which I probably didn't really do until after I was out of college. I love my parents dearly, and they were both older as parents. They were sort of students of the Dr. Spock method of raising children from the late 50s, early 60s. And so they were very hands off. Dr. Spock told people, leave your kids alone. Don't talk to them, all that kind of stuff. And my parents let us grow up. And of course, they were there to help us when we needed help, took us back and forth to ball practice and to Boy Scouts and piano lessons and basketball games at school and all that kind of stuff until we drove ourselves. So it's not like they were standoffish and ignored us. They let us decide what we were interested in and make our own decisions. I look back on my childhood very fondly these days.
Stuart, would you be able to share, you mentioned your dad, beautiful Norman Rockwell type of childhood upbringing, maybe a particular memory or something that stood out in your mind, something that, not necessarily a turning point, but something that you really remember your dad talking about. Could be a financial education conversation or just something that really marked a memory that you'd be able to share with us.
Yeah, my dad was a man of very few words. I still meet people around Nashville who knew him because he was also a CPA. I had no idea what that was when I decided that I was going to follow in his footsteps, but I still meet people around Nashville who interacted with him. And, if you remember the old E.F. Hutton commercials that, where they said, well, when E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. Well, that was my dad. And he was a knowledgeable tax guy and a tax expert. He was a partner with Ernst and Winnie, which is Ernst and Young now. And people sought out his expertise. He had clients like Heart Hospital Corporation of America and others like that, and he was the expert. I was probably 14 years old, and we were out cutting up a tree that had fallen, making some firewood. I was pretty much used to going out working with my father, and he would never say a word to me other than kick that here or stuff like that. I was a little intimidated. I was starting to think about financial things, and I asked him what the word equity meant, and he just rattled off, the definition of equity, and we just talked for the next hour about all kinds of business things and financial things, rather. And we continued that over the years. Still, he didn't talk a lot, but it was always in my court to start the conversations. But that's when I began to realize there was a lot of intellect there. I appreciated those conversations, and we continued to have those tech conversations for the next 30 years.
Okay, so we're going to switch gears to you as a dad now. Stuart, how many kids do you have right now?
Kenny, I have 8 kids. It's a hers, mine, and ours situation. So I have 2 from my first marriage. She has 3 from her first marriage, and then she and I have 3 together. I feel like I've been 2 different dads. I was the dad to my oldest 2 and was kind of with them at every moment of their life. I would go to all the doctor's appointments, first day of school, and all of those kind of things, and was at their private school, all the time. And that was very enjoyable. And my oldest 2 children are grown. They're 33 and 29, grown and thriving and doing quite well. I actually work regularly with my oldest, my daughter. She's a professional writer, and she does a lot of content work for me in our real estate business. My oldest son is a Nashville police officer. My next 3 are my stepchildren. They're all still in the house, and we're helping them to get out into the world. You may have read a lot about this generation that sort of came of age during COVID.
Mm.
In my opinion, they were completely screwed. And just, the world they were brought up to think this is the way it was, it just all changed on them. So, it's a nationwide thing right now that, that generation is not really launching. They're not really leaving the nest, but we're working on that, and they're all working and trying to figure life out. My next three are 15, 13, 11. That's the group that I'm probably a very different dad with. I'm probably much more like my parents were, sort of watch and observe and participate in things that they decide they want to get involved in. Not that I don't think I was a bad dad before, but I do think I'm a better dad now. I was much calmer this go round than I was before. We love all of our children. We're taking all of them and their girlfriends, spouses, and whatever to the beach here in a couple of weeks, and great big house, and we're all going to be together, and we'll either have a blast or we'll kill each other.
I just got back from the beach about 2 weeks ago, and we had 4 families, and each family had about 2 to 4. I don't know how many spouses and kids and girlfriends and boyfriends are all under that household, but I think you said it pretty well in regards to have a good time or we're going to kill each other.
I think there's going to be 18 of us and a dog.
Good number.
It'll be fine. Everybody's got their own bedroom, so if we need to get away from each other, it should be fine.
Stuart, I love that you're able to kind of look over the years and see that you've adjusted in your parenting. Of course, started back at your dad, you're chopping wood with an axe. There's no chainsaws. You don't just call somebody, they take it over. I mean, if that alone doesn't set the stage for a different setting. And then, of course, pre-COVID, now we're post-COVID. So many variations of things, I'm sure, of what you've seen. I do believe that wisdom comes from age. And you think you know everything at 21 years old, and you don't know anything at 21 years old. You think you know things. You've mentioned being calmer. What have been some things that you could say, whether it's the kids or the time or just you? What is something that's passed to you, maybe just through experience, that you could help give us some wisdom about?
Yeah, just as far as being calmer, when you're 35 and you've got a 2-year-old at a restaurant and you don't like the way they're behaving or their behavior is embarrassing you or whatnot, 35-year-old Stewart would get pretty uptight about that and maybe even act worse than the child, because it was a reflection on me. The child can't behave. That must be my fault, and so forth and so on. I don't have any 2-year-olds now, but let's just say 55-year-old Stewart just realizes it just doesn't matter if the child is annoying someone else. Not a whole lot you can do about it. I do try to make my children behave. If it becomes that big of a deal, just get up and take the kid out of the restaurant. Things are just not as big of a deal as perhaps our younger selves thought they were. When you're younger, sometimes you can be consumed consciously or unconsciously with what other people think about you or what you think other people think of you. And that's just not really very important in the grand scheme of things. I don't think that there really is any such thing as normal. That's only what we tell ourselves is what's normal. And I've yet to this day to meet a normal person. Everybody's got issues. Everybody's got baggage that they're having to deal with, including the little children. Who knows why the 2-year-old is acting up at the restaurant anyway? I mean, why do 2-year-olds do anything? I guess you've used the term wisdom. I might just call it perspective. Just experience of life, and you just have a different perspective on what's truly important and what is not.
No, that's a great answer. And I'm 36, and even while you were telling that story about, being embarrassed, or I could feel my heart go a little bit, because I'm just like, there's been times, we're at church and my daughter doesn't want to get out of the car, or mommy has to unbuckle her. There's something that is, her way versus our way. And there's been times I've just been so frustrated, but there's also times I'm just like, you know what, we're going to just listen to her. We're going to let mommy take her out, and we're going to move on with her day. So I actually really appreciate you giving that example with the kid in the restaurant. So I got to ask then, as your perspective has shifted to where it is today, what are the things that do matter in light of where you're sitting? Obviously, you're not raising 2-year-olds anymore, but you're still a dad. And you made a comment actually before we even hit record that your kids were the main reason you're doing what you're doing, which I would echo. And I would think a lot of dads feel that way. So what are your thoughts on what matters now?
I think that what matters now is it's what's always mattered is time. One of the best pieces of parenting advice I ever got was, and I can't even remember where it came from, was go about doing what you're doing, but put a kid in the car and then just listen. So to this day, I try to rotate kids throughout the week and on Saturdays if I'm just going to the hardware store, take a kid in the car. It gets to be challenging because my youngest is also a girl. So I have 2 girls and 6 boys, and the bookends are girls. And, my youngest girl, she rules the house. Just ask her. And there's no doubt about it. But if I try to spend some time with her next older brother, just him on him, he's always trying to come along. You have to deal with that dynamic. But just take him with you on the trip and just let him talk and ask questions. It might be nonsense to you, but I think what's most important for anyone on the planet, frankly, is to feel like they have been heard by somebody who's important to them, mom or dad. I think that's more important than, than being on a ball team or in a dance class or what. None of these things are bad. And I think I was like this in the first set. There were so many activities that the schedule became the dominant factor and rather than the child. Because I think what's most important for the child to grow up and learn is that they are not the center of the universe. And you're one of 8 kids. Yeah, you know that. You're going to grow up knowing that. But they are not the most important thing. Taking care of other people and your faith is critically important as well. And so, and all of those things while you're listening to them in a car and talking with them, all of those things can be worked into the conversation. And if they're just expressing to you about how frustrated they are with some friend of theirs or one of their siblings, you just why do you think they feel about that? And try to turn it around, make them think. And not that you're telling them what to think, but just engage with them and talk with them. So I think the most important thing is time, and that they learn that they're not the center of the world, which is a little bit different than a lot of parenting techniques these days.
Yeah. And I was going to ask that. I wasn't sure if it was super relevant, but where do you think parents are messing up nowadays? And it's a different time than, it goes back to, how you grew up versus how things are now. Can you do the same thing your dad did and have the same type of kid result? To add to that, one other spin I want to put is you being you, with what you said in regards to dad was quiet. You have 8 kids, way different than 3 kids, but how have you adjusted in maybe some of these things that maybe you were messing up on?
Well, I think what parents are messing up on, I say most, you can't, there's no blanket statement. It's the social media piece. And I think just going back to what we were talking about before, this generation of COVID, it's really the first generation that has grown up completely with social media. And I think it's had a devastating effect on the maturation of most participants in that generation. We can sit around and gripe about it, but it's our problem to solve because we need that generation to get engaged. Us old people can stop work or at least slow down a little bit. And, to a large degree, they're working part-time, if at all. And so anyway, as a society, we've got to get a hold of this whole social media thing. And you can't rely on the tech companies to do it. In my opinion, it's not even their responsibility. It's our responsibility as parents to know what our children are doing. So to that regard, no, we can't parent like my parents parented. I can't even parent the way I did with my oldest 2 children. Completely different generation between the 29 and 30s and the 20-year-olds, the 20, 21-year-old. They are light years apart in their own experiences and perspectives They learn everything online, and for somehow it has immediate credibility to them. Probably a little bit like, if we read something in the newspaper, it's credible.
Mhm.
But if you've ever been close to a newspaper story and you know what happened and then you read about it, it's like, is this an alternate universe? Because you don't ever get the story right. But they come out from social media and they're completely convinced, either from their peers or because they read an article online or whatever, that they know,
Mhm.
when in reality, they know nothing.
Mhm.
They know nothing. I mean, we've always been arrogant in our 20s. I certainly was. You kind of referenced it before. At 21, we know nothing other than we don't know anything except that we're supremely confident. And they seem to be all that confident, but they have zero motivation.
Mm.
I think that's because the world rug was sort of jerked out from under them when school shut down and didn't go back, after spring break in 2020, and then couldn't figure out how to go back to school remote or in person for the whole next year. There were no absolutes for them anymore.
Mhm.
School was an absolute,
Mhm.
for almost all of us, and suddenly it wasn't there for them. And I think it's problematic, and we're all going to have to work through that. We are doing social media very differently with our younger three.
Mhm.
And there are tools out there to be able to manage it, but parents have to learn how to use them
Oh, that's
first.
good. I'm glad you
That's my
mentioned it.
perspective.
My kids are 7 and 3 right now. And a lot of the people I have on the show, their kids are usually older. So I'm actually just trying to soak in everything now. I'm saying someone, a younger dad, to be ready for that. And I know social media. I think one of the things I really, because self-assessed was how often am I on my phone? Because common thread throughout all these episodes is the kids are watching, they're taking on more than you think. And what you do
Mhm. Oh,
really
yes.
says a lot more than what you say, right? I know I need to be careful, even as I do these podcasts. I want to see different things. I want to post different things, but dad may be always on my phone. And I don't know if you've experienced that same thing in regards to actions, people, your kids absorbing that, but
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know if
Yeah.
any firsthand experiences on
Yeah.
that one.
Well, sure. I've had firsthand experiences, and we've established a rule, and we try to do family dinner at least 5 nights a week with whoever is in the house. Sometimes it just might be my wife and I and our three youngest, but we have a rule. There's no tech at the table. My daughter would walk around with her Amazon tablet. They would take it to bed. They can't take tech into their rooms. There's no tech at the table. And my wife is the biggest violator of that. I have to get onto her quite a bit, but, and that way we're sort of forced to look and talk to each other. And so that is, I don't know that that's a great rule, but it's at least 30 to 45 minutes a day without tech.
Mm.
And we do limit tech time to a couple hours a day. And then we do homeschool the youngest three. And so there's a lot of reading of actual books,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
hard copy paper things. I listen to audibles,
Right.
but we're intently trying to limit tech time.
No, I love hearing how parents are setting rules like that. I'm not saying what you're right is right for me or the next person, but just hearing what people are trying, I think is very helpful because I mean, they're closed doors. Unless we're talking about it, people really don't know. Watch Oprah or something and find out what are some parenting tips. But I appreciate you mentioned that rule: no tech at the
Right.
table and no tech in the bedrooms. So that may be something helpful for someone
Right.
else. If you have more of those tips, hold on to those because I'm going to probably go back to if there's any other tips or tricks that have worked for you parenting. You mentioned your faith briefly, and this is something that
Mhm.
along the topic of what matters in life and how are we raising our kids, and you've even mentioned motivation. How do you get someone to do something they don't want to do? You really can't unless you're giving them strong arguments of this is your reward or this is your consequence if you do these actions. How has the faith element of your household journey been thus far?
Well, we're Christians. We go to church on Sundays, and a lot of times Wednesdays. And so the faith dictates our weekly schedule to a large extent. I would say just in child rearing, not just the fact that we share faith stories throughout the week, but even in our disciplining. My father was a spanker, and so was my mother. My father was a lot more calm and deliberate about it. It was one of those wait until your father gets home kind of
Mhm.
house. never once did I ever feel like that I had been beaten or abused. I actually take the disciplining as an example to use to teach our faith in
Mm.
Christianity. There's no perfect people, but we are forgiven. And so sometimes when talking, especially with a 5-year old, what do they think they need to be forgiven for? And so that's a teaching example of like, so did you hit your sister in the head with the bat? Yes. What do you think should happen? What do you think the punishment for that should be? My youngest son would always make up something like he wanted to do. He was just, well, I guess you could make me do more text, and like, nice try. We would sit there and we would talk about what he did was wrong and the need for forgiveness, and then say, and now I'm not going to punish you for that
Mm.
because that is what Jesus did for us. And you can begin to sort of see that click in with them. So they didn't always get grace. Sometimes they got their punishments, usually time out or a loss of tech time or something like that.
Mhm.
But that's how we try to live it out. And we're not perfect at it by any means, but that's how we try to turn everything into a teaching.
I grew up in a Christian household as well, and we are Christians trying to raise our kids to love Jesus and have a relationship with him and not just, follow the rules because spanked if you don't follow the rules and, kind of fear the punishment. That's the only reason you're doing something.
Right.
But I totally agree. It's in those teachable moments that you look the part, you sound the part, you listen to the preaching, then you go home. And if nothing correlates with the two, kids are just going to be confused, right? Like, is this just what we do on Sundays or is this
Church is just playtime.
Yeah. So that's a good reminder, I'd say, for all of us, just to, how can we turn it back to Jesus dying on the cross for us and loving us and giving us grace and, asking forgiveness and, all those good things. Stuart, I know we're probably getting close on time here. I always like to sort of end with, what are some advice, tips that you can give to parents? I know we've talked already about a ton, but appreciate all your time really and just talking about our kids and how we can help our listeners out there. Any ending remarks or thoughts on advice to parents?
My advice is to let your kids listen to your kids and let them tell you what they need. Not that they'll be able to articulate it, but by listening and paying attention, you're going to figure out whether they're sad or lonely or
Mm.
they need a friend or whatever. There's really no substitute for time and attention. Everybody on the planet wants to be heard and feel like they've been heard. Not necessarily that they're going to get their own way, but that they got heard. And usually they're able to deal with their own stuff after they feel like they got heard. So, everybody loves their kids. So act like it and give them time. There's nothing more important than spending time with your kids.
Stuart, as a father of 8, I think that means a lot more because I know your time is very limited. So thank you for sharing that. Stuart, if our audience wanted to keep up with what you are up to, how do you direct them?
I would ask them to go to our website, harvardgrace.com. You can find out about all of our deals, past and present, and you can find great resources that'll cost you nothing but your email address. You can also find my Calendly link, and I do invite everybody to reach out, book some time with me. We can talk about raising kids or real estate, anytime you want. So I make that available to everybody.
Awesome. Stuart, I'll end there. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Kenny.